Ales coming right up. Hello, and welcome to the BRB. Please, have a seat. You're just in time for Tavern chatter.
What is your preferred way of obtaining stats? There's standard array, there's point buy, and there's rolling.
For creative characters, rolling would be my preferred. For level gameplay, standard array or point buy. Standard array for me is if you want everyone to kind of have that level ground with each other where they can make the customizations to their character based on classes, backgrounds, and feats to kind of set themselves aside. Point buy if they want to be specialists. That's where I would. Out of the three, that's my feeling on all three of those.
I've seen some things where, to keep it level like you're saying, they still do roll for stats, but then at that point you can select from anyone's rolled stats. You don't necessarily have to take the one that you rolled. That way everyone still has access to the same options. You're not getting one person that's got all 18s, the other's got all 3s.
So what that is, then one person rolls really well, and everyone else in that group can choose their rolls as well?
Yeah.
Is that what the idea is?
Or if you see someone that still rolled really well, but they had a low stat, and you like having a low stat because it adds some character, you can choose that instead.
So for a group of us, we would roll, 5 plus DM. We would have 5 different arrays to potentially choose from.
Mm-hmm.
I like that, actually.
I prefer that as well, especially when you play a long-term campaign and someone rolls poor stats. That affects their character for what could be a year-long plus game and has ruined their experience for the game.
I would say, why wouldn't you want to play with point buy then? Because point buy gives you the ability to all still kind of be within the same range of each other. And you're still going to have 1 or 2 bad stats. Not bad. You're going to have 2 stats that maybe aren't great, right? But you can still specialize yourself in a group, and it just adds that level ground.
I like the idea of level ground. However, when you look at point buy or the standard array, it's almost broken in a way to where it weakens your character. You don't have the ability to max out some stats, at least when you reach your first ASI. And because of that, you as a player would probably be more searching your ASIs as a way to boost your stats. You now can't really have the ability to customize with feats, which is honestly the fun part about playing with your character.
Here's actually how I think of it. The difference between point buy and standard array. The decision there is based on how new the players are. If they're new, I'll give them standard array. If they're more experienced, I'll give them point buy and with point buy, you can get up to standard array. But I would choose those if it's for more of a role-playing campaign, whereas if it's for more of a combat-based campaign, I would allow for rolled stats because generally you're going to get higher stats.
I kind of on that board. I agree with Brian. I think that there are different styles of play that benefit different styles of stats. To me, point buy or standard array can offer that same customization that you're looking for, Brant. It's just more based off of how safe you feel in a campaign. There are some people who choose not to max out their abilities. You can be fine with a +4. If you're picking up a magical weapon, if you're using some of your subclasses to boost your stat abilities. Think of, I play Hellfire, the paladin in our campaign. I actually only have an 18 in strength. The reason why I did that is because I picked up a magical weapon, and I have my subclass, which is I am a Paladin of Devotion, which gives me the ability to channel divinity to add my charisma score to my attack bonus. There are ways to figure it out to where you can still customize yourself without having to be god-level characters.
2 things branching off of that. Number 1, stats are the basis of the game. All of your rolls come from your stats. But it's not the end-all be-all. Like you were saying, there are tons of customization mechanics to swap out what stat you're using for a roll. I think there's a magic item that lets you use your strength modifier for a wisdom save once per day.
If you're talking about other things, think about the Hexblade. They have the ability to use their charisma modifier instead of their strength or dexterity. So you could play a character that is a warlock who wants to be an upfront sword fighter, and you could forego your dex score and your strength score and just use your charisma.
Or like an artificer, where they get to use their intelligence on any magic item rolls.
Yeah.
That seems better for skills or whatever items they collect to hone their abilities for combat or for roleplay. For attributes, that's a different story. That defines your character permanently.
So would you feel more comfortable if you just took stats that were already kind of predetermined?
I like the idea. However, with how the player's handbook is set up, the standard array and the point buy system just makes things a little bit weaker, in my opinion. Bump it up by 1 point. The highest you can get in point buy is a 15. Whereas if you roll your stats, there is a chance you can get an 18.
Until feats or ASIs, that is something to bring up. And is that even with standard array and point buy, you're still well beyond any mortal in Dungeons and Dragons.
That being said, with the 18, you can still add your racial attributes and whatever else, and you can get up to a 20 very quickly with the 18, whereas with the 15, you wouldn't be able to.
By level 8, you could have a full stat at 20.
That's the problem is at level 8. It'd be nice to have a character that can at least have a maxed out stat at the first ASI. And then from there, every ASI is just a feat to help hone the character rather than trying to buff up stats that you can cap out at 20.
To specialize.
So the second thing that I want to say is we are all approaching this from a purely mechanical standpoint from within the game. There are players who have a better time playing the game with higher stats, regardless of whether it's a roleplay campaign or a combat campaign. And at the end of the day, the point of the game is for everyone playing to have fun. So if that's what they want to do, I think that should be the primary focus over what in-game mechanics it most suits. I'm not disagreeing, I'm just also saying we should approach it from a personal level as well as a mechanical one.
As always, players and DMs should speak to each other. Always make sure that you cover most of this in your 0 sessions. It honestly will just make the whole round trip of a campaign easier on everybody if you can establish what people are looking for at the beginning of the campaign.
The biggest thing is that everyone needs to be on somewhat equal footing. They don't need to necessarily have the same stats, but you need to have the same options. You can't have one person doing a point buy and one person doing a roll where everyone has different means of obtaining stats.
A thing for me with roll stats, it was cool that Eric brought up a way to level this out for me. Sometimes I always worry about a character who rolls exceptionally well, not believing them on their stats or anything. Just they get these outrageous stats, and then this person becomes this Mary Sue, is a good way to put it. They're the jack of all trades playing any class really, because all of a sudden now they have 18s in almost everything that they've had. Maybe they have the one bad stat. That kind of feels like that can affect your party a little bit. If you have a character who just could do everything. I think parties do better when they have separations, specializations, things like that, because it gives everybody that chance to shine.
As to Brant's point of maxing a stat first ASI and then really driving it home, that's fun for some people, but it kind of falls into what Josh was saying where extremes, the specializations need to be tempered within the group, and having one person who is amazing at everything dexterity means that everyone else is just bad at dexterity by comparison. So having kind of a balance in that, something you can talk about in your session 0 is everyone getting together with your character saying, this is what I'm planning stat-wise. That way you can have a discussion, you don't overlap. If you have 2 players coming in with blind characters and both of them are trying to go for that dex spike type play where you max it out immediately and then feed everything into it, they're going to either be at each other's throats or one's just going to be inherently inferior than the other.
And I actually disagree on that one. If, let's say you have the rogue that has a 20 in dex and you have the monk who has a 17. Sure, you can send the rogue off to go and sneak around and he's going to be the one that's gathering intelligence. But I could see the monk trying to, not necessarily being second, but being there for backup. And so, sure, he might not roll as high, but you still have that partnership. And okay, well, now rather than having a sidekick, you have the 2 of them who are trying to, okay, well, I'm going to take a penalty on mine just to try to help boost the others up. So as a group, we are doing better. Or that adds a little bit of a role play aspect in there. That could be a fun dynamic to try to explore.
I agree. Taking different specializations within the same stat is completely doable. What I'm proposing is kind of an edge case where you have two people trying to build the same dex specialization. Or for ease, let's go charisma. You both take Inspiring Leader. You both take spells from the Warlock spell list as a feat. Or can you get Eldritch Blast from a feat?
Yes. There's several things you can get.
The thing that I'm saying is you don't want to run into a situation where two people are running the same specialization, because one of them is inherently going to be worse at it than the other. If under the exact same path, unless you roll the exact same stats, it's going to be a difference. And the rest of the party's utility suffers because of it, because now there's two people overlapping and something else somewhere else is getting blocked.
That just sounds like it was poorly planned. Like, you come to a table with the characters you want to play, and it goes back to when we were building characters before. Like, have a conversation with your party first. If you were both playing the same guy, be like, okay, I'll switch, because unless you have something that connects them, then you gotta come up with something.
And that was my end point, is during session 0, talk about these specializations, make sure you're not.
But that's not necessarily looking at stats. That's looking at
That's just an over-crossing of a bunch of skills and stuff, and that's not helpful. If you have a 4-person party and 2 of them are rogues, you're gonna have a fucking problem. But the best part of having overlapping skills and special abilities is you get a nerd squad. Like, it worked out extremely well in some of our campaigns where you have the 2 people that are smart, maybe they both have decent intelligence and decent wisdom, but then they can put their heads together and work together on one project. I could see that with Dex being a thing too. It's just like, all right, these 2 are going to get up and over that wall somehow, and they're going to figure it out together.
So I'm going to play DM's advocate, which I do a lot in a lot of our episodes. I feel like there may be a reason behind this. I'm going to do kind of like a personal story real quick, just to kind of clarify my point. The reason I look at it the way I look at it versus how a lot of you guys look at it is because you guys are kind of seeing it from a player's point of view. The way I see it kind of from my point of view, which, coming from being the guy at the end of the table, the reason why I've been a lot more into standard array and point buy and things like that is for a more organized game. That's not the right word.
Balanced.
A balanced game. The reason I have this is because I've done a lot of weird things in the past. Personal story-wise, every person here has been a player of mine before. You guys know that I run kind of the go ahead and roll your stats. I'm big into that, and I've even made it easier on a lot of my players who roll really bad stats by letting you guys roll 2 sets of rolled stats and then pick from either or. So I've let you guys basically build your perfect characters, I feel like, for the most part. I've made it really easy for you guys to mid-max yourself, and it's not bad. I'm not going to say that's a terrible way to play. It was fun. We had a good time. You guys look like you enjoyed yourself, but it made it hard for me to balance some of the game's events, some of their... for the most part, we've done modules, and it was hard to do modules that were already preset, even when I did my own customizations to them, because sometimes you guys were just so powerful. It would be so hard to make you guys feel like you're struggling through an encounter, because you guys, for the most part, could handle anything I threw at you. And that's not a bad thing. If that's a DM style of play, let your players have fun. That's a good style. The reason why I would do standard array or point buy going forward from here as a personal DM choice is to give you guys that chance to really struggle in a game.
In this case, this has been very mixed.
Alright, it's closing time. Feel free to stay out in the stables. If you like what we had to talk about, hit that like button. If you want to see what we have in store next, hit that subscribe button as well. Check out our social media in the description below for more of our content. Have any suggestions? Leave it in a comment below.